You know that feeling when you think you've finally found peace? When you believe that after years of fighting battles in marble hallways and fluorescent-lit committee rooms, you can just breathe? That's exactly where I was 3 months ago. My name is Richard Thornton, and for the past 12 years, I've served as a state senator representing District 7. I've written legislation that's changed lives, fought corporations that thought they were above the law, and sat across from governors who tried to intimidate me. None of that prepared me for what was about to happen. It started on a Tuesday morning in September, the kind of morning where the air smells like possibility and the coffee tastes just right. I was standing on the wraparound porch of my family's ancestral property, 140 acres of pristine land that my great-great-grandfather purchased in 1873. This wasn't just land, this was legacy. Every oak tree had a story, every creek bend held a memory. My daughter took her first steps in the meadow behind the old barn. My father taught me to fish in the pond that sparkles like diamonds when the afternoon sun hits it just right. The property sits on the outer edge of what used to be farmland, but over the past decade, developers had been circling like vultures. Subdivisions popped up with names like Willowbrook Estates and Heritage Hills. Ironic, considering they bulldozed all the actual heritage to build their cookie-cutter mansions. But my land remained untouched, an island of history in a sea of vinyl siding and HOA regulations. I was reviewing some proposed amendments to the state's property rights legislation when I heard the crunch of gravel in my driveway. A silver Lexus, polished to an almost offensive shine, pulled up. Out stepped a woman in her mid-50s, wearing a blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. Her heels clicked against the stones like a countdown timer. Behind her, a younger man in an ill-fitting suit clutched a leather portfolio like it contained nuclear launch codes. Senator Thornton? Her smile was practiced, the kind that never reaches the eyes. I'm Barbara Westfield, president of the Meadowbrook Community Association. This is James Chen, our legal consultant. I set down my coffee mug, a slight unease creeping into my chest. I'm not part of any community association, Ms. Westfield. My property predates every subdivision within 5 miles. Her smile didn't waver. That's actually what we need to discuss. May we come in? Against my better judgment, I invited them into my study, the room where I'd drafted legislation that protected thousands of homeowners from predatory lending. The irony wouldn't become clear for another 10 minutes. Barbara settled into the leather chair across from my desk like she owned it. James remained standing, opening his portfolio with trembling fingers. Something was off about him, the way his eyes kept darting to Barbara, the slight shake in his hands. Senator, we'll be direct, Barbara began, her voice taking on a razor edge beneath the politeness. The Meadowbrook Community Association officially incorporated last year. Our boundaries, as filed with the county, include your property. I actually laughed. That's impossible. This land has been in my family for over 150 years. No HOA can just what? She leaned forward. File proper paperwork? Work with county officials who understand the value of organized communities? Senator Thornton, we've done everything by the book. Your property falls within our boundaries, which means you're subject to our covenants, conditions, and restrictions. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. You're joking. James finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Sir, I've reviewed the documents. The incorporation papers were filed correctly. The county approved them. Technically speaking, I interrupted, my senatorial voice coming out now, the one I use when I'm about to dismantle someone's argument on the floor. You cannot force privately held, historically owned property into an HOA without the owner's consent. I literally wrote the legislation that prevents exactly this kind of overreach. Barbara's smile finally dropped. What replaced it made my blood run cold. Did you write it well enough, Senator? Because my attorneys found several interesting loopholes, the kind that a busy legislator might have overlooked while juggling multiple bills, the kind that someone with enough money and motivation could exploit. She slid a document across my desk. You owe $17,000 in back fees, penalties for non-compliance with community standards, and administrative costs. Payment is due in 30 days. Failure to comply will result in a lien against your property. She slid a document across my desk. You owe $17,000 in back fees, penalties for non-compliance with community standards, and administrative costs. Payment is due in 30 days. Failure to comply will result in a lien against your property. I stared at the paper like it was written in an alien language. $17,000 for land that my family had owned since before the Civil War. for property that I'd paid taxes on, maintained, and loved for my entire life. "This is extortion," I said quietly. "This is governance," Barbara corrected, standing up. "We'll see ourselves out. Oh, and Senator, I'd be careful about using your political position to fight this. Abuse of power is such an ugly look, especially for someone with your reputation. The press would have a field day." They left me sitting in stunned silence, the document feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my hands. Through the window, I watched their Lexus disappear down my driveway, dust settling in their wake. I didn't know it then, but that conversation was just the opening move in a chess game I didn't even know I was playing. And Barbara Westfield? She was a far more dangerous opponent than she appeared. My phone buzzed. A text from my chief of staff. "Senator, we have a problem. Someone's leaked a story about you fighting an HOA. Press is asking questions." The game had begun, and I was already 3 moves behind. The next 72 hours felt like I was drowning in bureaucratic quicksand. Every time I thought I'd found solid ground, something pulled me deeper. I spent that first night after Barbara's visit doing what I do best: research. My study became a war room. Documents spread across every surface, my laptop screen glowing in the darkness as I dug through county records, incorporation filings, and HOA bylaws. What I found made my stomach turn. The Meadowbrook Community Association had been incorporated on December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas, when most county offices operate with skeleton crews and nobody's paying attention. The paperwork was technically flawless, every box checked, every signature notarized, every filing fee paid. But the boundaries they'd drawn, they formed a strange tentacle-like shape that specifically reached out to encompass my property, while excluding several other parcels that should have been included by any logical standard. This wasn't accidental. This was surgical. I called my attorney, Marcus Webb, at 6 in the morning. Marcus had been my legal counsel for 8 years, a sharp-minded Harvard graduate who'd turned down partnership at a major firm to open his own practice focusing on property rights. If anyone could untangle this mess, it was him. "Richard, I need you to send me everything," Marcus said after I explained the situation. His voice had lost its usual casual warmth. "Don't talk to the press, don't talk to the HOA, and for God's sake, don't talk to anyone at the Capitol about this yet." Here was a long pause. "Because I'm looking at the names on the HOA board right now. Barbara Westfield's husband is Douglas Westfield. Does that name ring any bells?" It hit me like a freight train. Douglas Westfield, CEO of Westfield Development Corporation. The same company I'd blocked from getting a zoning variance last year that would have let them build a massive shopping complex on protected wetlands. The same company whose lobbyists I'd embarrassed during a committee hearing by reading their own environmental impact report back to them, highlighting every lie and distortion. "This is revenge," I breathed. "This is war," Marcus corrected. "And Richard, they're not playing by rules you're familiar with." He was right. By 10 a.m., my phone was exploding. News vans were parked at the end of my driveway. Apparently, someone had tipped them off about the senator fighting basic community standards. My district office was fielding calls from constituents asking why I thought I was above the rules everyone else had to follow. Social media was lighting up with hashtags like #entitled politician and #HOAgate. The narrative was already written, and I wasn't the hero. My press secretary, Jennifer Cole, showed up at my door looking like she'd aged 5 years overnight. "Senator, we need to get ahead of this. Let me draft a statement." "No." I was standing at the window watching reporters set up their cameras. "That's what they want. They want me to use my position, to look like I'm throwing my weight around. The moment I do, they've won." "Then what do we do?" I turned to face her. "We prove they're corrupt. We prove this entire HOA is a shell game designed to force me out so Westfield Development can get my land." Jennifer's eyes widened. "Can you prove that?" "Not yet, but I will." That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went door to door in the Meadowbrook subdivision, not as a senator, as a neighbor, as someone looking for truth. The first 3 houses, nobody answered. At the 4th, a young mother named Patricia Morrison opened the door with a screaming toddler on her hip and exhaustion written across her face. "Senator Thornton?" She looked confused, then wary. "Are you here about the HOA thing? Because I really can't." "Ms. Morrison, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to understand what's happening in this community. How long have you lived here?" She studied me for a long moment, then sighed. 2 years. Long enough to regret every day of it. Something in her voice made me pause. Can I ask why? She glanced behind her, then stepped out onto the porch, closing the door. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. The HOA fees keep going up. Last year it was $200 a month. This year, $450. They say it's for community improvements, but I haven't seen a single improvement. My neighbor asked to see the financial records. They're supposed to be public, right? He got a certified letter threatening legal action for harassment. Who signed the letter? Barbara Westfield. Patricia's expression hardened. Senator, everyone's terrified of her. She's gotten 3 families foreclosed on for violations. One couple's kid drew on their driveway with chalk, and they got fined $5,000 for defacing community property. When they couldn't pay, the HOA put a lien on their house. My hands clenched into fists. Did they fight it? They tried. Barbara showed up at their door with a lawyer and photographs. Turns out someone had been watching their house for months, documenting every tiny infraction. Walking to the mailbox in pajamas, violation of community appearance standards. Christmas lights up 2 days past the approved date, violation. Their grass was a 1/4 inch too tall, violation. By the time she was done, they owed $40,000. They lost their home. I felt sick. Where did they go? I don't know. They had 2 little kids. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. Senator, we can't fight her. She has money, lawyers, and half the county commission in her pocket. If you can't beat her, what chance do we have? I wanted to tell her I'd fix everything, that justice would prevail, that the law protected people like her. But standing there, watching fear and hopelessness war across her face, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't sure anymore if the law could protect anyone from what Barbara Westfield had built, because she'd used the law itself as a weapon, turning every regulation and rule into a chain around people's necks. And I had helped write some of those laws. 3 weeks into the battle, I got a call that changed everything. It was 11 p.m., and I was still in my study, surrounded by a maze of documents and cold coffee, when my phone lit up with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Journalists had been calling at all hours, fishing for quotes they could twist into headlines. But something made me pick up. Senator Thornton? The voice was male, young, shaking with nerves. Please don't hang up. My name is James Chen. We met at your house. I'm the legal consultant for the Meadowbrook HOA. I sat up straight, suddenly wide awake. Why are you calling me? Because I can't sleep anymore. He let out a shaky breath. Senator, I need to meet with you, tonight, somewhere private. I have documents you need to see. But if Barbara finds out I'm talking to you, I'm done. Not just fired, she'll destroy me. She's done it before. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my truck in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner 30 miles outside town, watching James Chen's beat-up Honda pull up beside me. He looked even worse than he had at my house. Dark circles under his eyes, his suit wrinkled like he'd slept in it, hands trembling as he clutched a manila envelope. We took a corner booth, far from the tired waitress reading a paperback at the counter. James wouldn't make eye contact, just kept staring at the envelope like it might explode. How did you get involved with Westfield? I asked quietly. He laughed bitterly. Stupid ambition. I graduated law school 3 years ago, couldn't find a job at any of the big firms. Barbara's husband Douglas offered me a position with Westfield Development's legal team. Good salary, benefits, a chance to prove myself. I thought I'd won the lottery. What changed? I started noticing things. Properties the company wanted always seemed to have mysterious liens appear. Business owners who wouldn't sell suddenly faced code violations that shut them down. People who fought back found themselves drowning in lawsuits they couldn't afford to defend. And Barbara? She was always there, always smiling, always 10 steps ahead of everyone. He finally looked up at me, and I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Senator, the HOA isn't a community association. It's a weapon. They've used it to force out 11 families in 2 years. He finally looked up at me, and I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Senator, the HOA isn't a community association. It's a weapon. They've used it to force out 11 families in 2 years. Every single property gets bought by shell companies that all trace back to Westfield Development. They're using HOA law to legally steal people's homes. My jaw clenched. And my property? James slid the envelope across the table. You're the crown jewel. Your 140 acres? Westfield Development has had plans drawn up for years. A luxury resort and golf course. They've been trying to buy your land through intermediaries for the past 5 years. When you kept refusing, Douglas Westfield told his wife to handle the problem. I opened the envelope. Inside were emails, financial records, architectural renderings of my family's land transformed into manicured greens and glass-walled buildings. But the most damning documents were the text messages between Barbara and Douglas Westfield. The senator won't sell. Time for Plan B. Expand the HOA boundaries. Make it hurt. If we bankrupt him with fees and legal costs, he'll have to sell. Make it personal. My hands shook as I read message after message detailing their strategy. They'd researched my finances, my political vulnerabilities, even my family. One message made my blood run cold. His daughter Emily visits every Sunday. Make sure the press is there when we serve the lien notice. Maximum embarrassment. They were going to ambush my daughter, I said, my voice dangerous. James nodded miserably. I copied all of this 2 days ago. I was supposed to prepare the foreclosure documents for your property next week. Senator, I can't be part of this anymore. I thought I was building a career. I've been helping destroy lives. Why risk telling me? Why not just quit? Because quitting won't stop them. And because he pulled out another document. I found something else. Something even Barbara doesn't know about. This document was older, yellowed with age. A deed transfer from 1978 showing that a significant portion of the land the Meadowbrook subdivision was built on had been purchased through eminent domain fraud. The original owners, an elderly farming couple named the Hendersons, had been told their land was needed for a public highway. Instead, it was sold to a development company, the predecessor to Westfield Development. The Hendersons had a son, James continued. He fought the seizure, claimed it was illegal. He was found dead 3 months later. Car accident. The investigation was closed in 2 days. You think it wasn't an accident? I think powerful people have been playing these games for a very long time. And I think Barbara and Douglas learned from the previous generation how to use the law as a weapon. I sat back, my mind racing. This was bigger than I'd imagined. This wasn't just about my property. This was systematic corruption spanning decades, wrapped in the legitimate language of community associations and property law. James, these documents, they're enough to bring criminal charges, fraud, conspiracy, possibly worse. But the moment we go public, you become a target. I know. He smiled grimly. But Senator, you taught me something. I've watched your career. You've spent 12 years fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves, writing laws to protect the vulnerable. I became a lawyer because I believed in justice. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that. I looked at this young man who was about to sacrifice everything to do the right thing, and I made a decision. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Tomorrow morning, you're going to call in sick. We're going to my attorney's office, and we're going to build a case that brings down the entire Westfield empire. Barbara will know it was me. Let her. Because by the time she figures it out, it'll be too late. I gathered the documents carefully. James, you're about to learn something I figured out a long time ago. The law can be a weapon, yes, but in the right hands, it's a shield that protects the innocent, and sometimes it's a hammer that smashes corruption. For the first time since we'd met, James Chen smiled like he believed in something again. We were about to start a war, but this time, I had ammunition. Marcus Webb's office the next morning looked like the command center for a military operation. He'd called in 2 associate attorneys, a forensic accountant named Linda Zhao, and a former FBI investigator turned private consultant named Ray Martinez. When I walked in with James Chen and laid out the documents, Marcus's expression went from professional interest to barely contained rage in about 30 seconds. This is a RICO case, Linda said, her fingers flying across her calculator as she traced the money. Look at this. Shell companies funneling profits through offshore accounts, systematic fraud, intimidation tactics, Senator. Ray was studying the text messages through reading glasses, his weathered face unreadable. He'd spent 25 years investigating white-collar crime before retiring, and I'd called him specifically because he'd once told me that the most dangerous criminals were the ones who never got dirt under their fingernails. The Henderson death, Ray said quietly. Senator, I worked in this area in the 80s. I remember that case. It was closed too fast, buried too deep. A lot of people got rich the year after he died. Can we prove a connection? I asked. Not yet, but I can start pulling threads. If there's something there, I'll find it. He looked at James. Son, you did the right thing. Hard thing, but the right thing. Over the next week, we worked like we were preparing for the most important trial in history. Marcus filed a lawsuit against the Meadowbrook Community Association, Douglas Westfield, and Barbara Westfield personally, citing fraud, conspiracy, violations of the Fair Housing Act, and abuse of legal process. We included every piece of evidence James had provided, along with sworn statements from Patricia Morrison and 6 other homeowners who'd been terrorized by Barbara's tactics. But we didn't stop there. I spent 3 days locked in conference rooms with Linda, tracing every financial transaction the Westfields had made over the past decade. What we found was breathtaking in its audacity. The HOA fees that kept increasing, most of that money wasn't going to community maintenance. It was being funneled into management companies that were just more shell corporations owned by the Westfields. They were literally stealing from the homeowners while foreclosing on them for unpaid fees. "This is theft on a massive scale," Linda said, showing me spreadsheets that made my head spin. "Conservatively, they've embezzled over $3 million in the past 5 years alone." I called an emergency meeting with the state's Attorney General, Catherine Reeves. We'd worked together on anti-corruption legislation, and I trusted her. When I laid out the evidence in her office, she went pale. "Richard, if even half of this is true, we're looking at multiple felonies. But you know what the Westfields are going to do? Come after me with everything they have. They're going to make you radioactive. They'll say you're abusing your position, weaponizing the AG's office for personal revenge. Every vote you've ever cast will be scrutinized, every campaign donor questioned. They'll dig up every parking ticket, every questionable expense report, anything they can use to make you look dirty." I thought about my daughter Emily, about the legacy my great-great-grandfather had built, about Patricia Morrison's exhausted face and James Chen's trembling hands. Let them try. Catherine, they've been doing this for decades, destroying families and hiding behind legitimate-looking paperwork. Someone has to stop them. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, I'm opening a criminal investigation. But Richard, be prepared. This is going to get ugly." She was right. The next morning I woke up to find my face on the front page of the state's largest newspaper. The headline read, "Senator Abuses Power in HOA Dispute." The article was a masterpiece of manipulation, quoting anonymous sources claiming I'd threatened county officials, used my position to pressure the Attorney General, and was trying to dodge legitimate community fees because I thought I was above the law. By noon, 3 members of my own party had called for an ethics investigation. My district office was flooded with angry calls. Someone spray-painted "corrupt" on my mailbox. The evening news showed Barbara Westfield, perfectly coiffed and speaking with practiced emotion, claiming that I was harassing her and her community because they'd dared to hold a powerful politician accountable. It was a lie, all of it, but it was a lie that sounded believable. My chief of staff wanted me to fight back in the media. My press secretary drafted 7 different statements. Everyone had an opinion on how I should defend myself, but I'd learned something over 12 years in politics. Sometimes, the best defense isn't defending yourself at all. Instead, I did something unexpected. I held a press conference and invited every homeowner who'd been victimized by the Meadowbrook HOA. 23 people showed up. They stood behind me as I spoke, their presence more powerful than any words I could say. "I'm not going to debate my integrity," I told the cameras. "I'm going to let you meet the people Barbara Westfield destroyed. I'm going to let them tell you what happens when an HOA becomes a criminal enterprise disguised as a community association. And when they're done, I'm going to ask you a simple question. If this could happen to them, and it could happen to a state senator, what makes you think you're safe?" One by one, they told their stories. The single father who lost his home because he couldn't afford the special assessment fees. The elderly widow whose late husband had built their house with his own hands, forced to sell because of fabricated violations. The young couple whose dreams of starting a family ended when they went bankrupt fighting HOA fees that kept multiplying like a virus. The cameras caught every tear, every trembling voice, every moment of raw emotion. And when it was over, the narrative began to shift. Because Barbara Westfield could spin a story about one entitled politician, but she couldn't explain away 23 devastated families. The war wasn't over, but for the first time, we were fighting on level ground. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in November, 6 months after Barbara Westfield had first pulled into my driveway with her practiced smile and her $17,000 invoice. The courthouse was packed, standing room only, with overflow crowds watching from monitors in adjacent rooms. This wasn't just about property law anymore. This was a referendum on whether the powerful could weaponize the legal system against ordinary people. Marcus Webb had assembled a legal team that made the Westfield's expensive attorneys look nervous. We had evidence, we had witnesses, we had James Chen, who'd spent the past months working with the FBI to build an airtight case. But most importantly, we had the truth. The prosecution went first. Catherine Reeves herself led the charge, her opening statement sharp as a scalpel. She walked the jury through the Westfield scheme with devastating precision: the fake HOA, the manufactured fees, the systematic theft. She showed them the text messages between Barbara and Douglas, their casual discussion of ruining lives projected on screens for everyone to see. Barbara sat at the defense table in a modest blue dress, her hair pulled back, looking like someone's kindly aunt. It was a performance. I'd learned to see through performances. The first witness was Patricia Morrison. She was terrified. I could see her hands shaking as she took the oath. But when she started speaking about her 2-year-old son and the home she'd lost, her voice grew stronger. Mrs. Westfield came to my door, Patricia testified. She said I was teaching my son to be a criminal by letting him draw with chalk. She said if I didn't pay the fine, she'd make sure everyone in the community knew I was raising a delinquent. I was a single mother working 2 jobs. I couldn't afford $5,000 for chalk drawings that washed away with the first rain. Barbara's attorney, a slick man named Harrison Kemp, tried to twist her words during cross-examination. Isn't it true, Mrs. Morrison, that you signed an agreement when you purchased your home, an agreement that clearly outlined community standards? I signed a lot of papers when I bought my house, Patricia answered. I was a first-time homeowner. I thought an HOA would keep the neighborhood nice, not become a weapon against me. The courtroom murmured. The judge, a stern woman named Carla Mendez, banged her gavel once. Order. Witness after witness took the stand over the next 3 weeks. Each one told the same story with different details: predatory fees, manufactured violations, a system designed to make compliance impossible. The forensic accountant walked the jury through the financial records, showing exactly where millions of dollars had disappeared into Westfield-controlled companies. Then James Chen took the stand. I watched Barbara's face as her former employee was sworn in. For the first time since the trial began, her mask slipped. The rage in her eyes was volcanic. James was calm now, no longer the trembling young attorney I'd met in my study. He'd found his spine, and his testimony was surgical. He described meetings where Barbara and Douglas had laughed about squeezing the deadbeats. He produced emails detailing their strategy to target my property specifically. He even had recordings. It turned out James had been wearing a wire for the FBI for the past 2 months before coming to me, documenting everything. Mr. Chen, Marcus asked during direct examination, why did you decide to come forward? James looked directly at Barbara. Because I became a lawyer to help people, not destroy them. Because I was raised to believe that the law was about justice, not profit. And because every night when I went home, I couldn't look at myself in the mirror anymore. The defense tried to paint James as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge, but it's hard to discredit someone when they have mountains of evidence backing up every word. When it was time for me to testify, I walked to the stand feeling the weight of everyone's expectations. I wasn't just representing myself anymore. I was representing every person who'd ever been crushed by someone who had more money, more lawyers, more power.